Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give y'all our quick recap of last night's school board meeting, the last school board meeting of this fiscal year. How are you doing today, Heather?
Good. Well, so last night, you know, we started off our board meeting with public comment. There was a strong public comment showing, and we were really proud of that. We did have a hearing for the closure of the Tuttle building, and just a comment that nobody phoned in for that, so we can get to what happened to that building later on. Then the superintendent gave remarks. He talked about there was a conversation where he updated on kind of the spending of the ARP money, right? So he talked about that. He talked about graduation and how COVID affected graduation and graduation rates. The board voted on an EDIA on fundraising for PTAs and boosters and all kinds of things. We'll talk more about that later. And then the board voted on our budget, while noting that there will be a considerable amendment coming when we talk about ESSER $3 coming in later in the fall. They eventually did vote to close the Tuttle building, and then they voted on a resolution to condemn gun violence in our city. And that was kind of the gist of the meeting last night.
Yeah, there weren't any slides, so there's no slide of the night for you. But there was a lot of voting took place, a lot of big things did happen. It might not just have felt super, it might not have resonated with kind of everything that's going on in our community right now, but I do think a couple of things are important. And so one is, when we talk about the superintendent talking about ESSER $3. Remember, these are our federal relief dollars, kind of our third installment that is coming from the Biden administration and this current Congress. And so they haven't actually made any decisions yet about how that money will be spent. And so I think that's important to recognize. The second thing is that the Tuttle building is a building in Southeast Como over in Northeast Minneapolis, right off of like the University of Minnesota campus. And it used to house Heritage. Now, Heritage is moving into the Wellstone building, or into the Wilder building with Wellstone, I should say. And then finally, I do think it is actually important, and we shouldn't gloss over the equity and diversity impact assessment on school fundraising and like all the boosters things, because we've heard a lot of things come out this year around kind of manipulative ways that some schools would utilize their budget and then utilize school fundraising in order to fund extra staff people and all these things that are against district policy. And it's against district policy because only some schools have the capability of doing so. And so there will be an equity and diversity impact assessment around how school fundraising impacts the quality of education, it sounds like, which I think is really significant. And I will also say, I think this equity and diversity impact assessment should really be exploring how we fund schools totally in Minneapolis public schools, because even though there are, it feels like our budget is baked and that's how, money is dispersed in the way it is, there are still values and assumptions that are attached to our budget that never change. But, people would guess that it has to be this way when it really doesn't. And so I think there are real things to weigh and consider that I hope that our EDIA really starts to explore as well, because I think that will be important to unearth and understand about our budget. Um, but yeah, there wasn't really a whole lot of presentations last night. And so we can move on to our do better moment and our most valuable moment. So Heather, do you want to kick us off with your do better moment?
Yes, I'm in my feelings about this do better moment. I'm going to say that up front. Last night, my do better moment was the board's resolution on gun violence. I need to name how many resolutions and or statements of support that our superintendent or this board has put out, which have led to zero meaningful actions. Even last night, just the acknowledgement of how hard the school year was and what the students of the city endured. It just falls really flat for me because We also have been talking and really focusing on certain highlighted student of color experiences. Students of color have been naming the way that they've been racialized and profiled in our buildings. And so I think another resolution is not worth the paper it's printed on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard and frustrating, right? Like, I get from a school board's perspective, like wanting to, stand up and say something as an entity, and I think that's fine and dandy, but also like it needs to also match what you're doing internally, right? And I think that's been a thing for me, as folks who have listened to this, have listened to us talk over the course of the last year, is like, we can't just abdicate responsibility, right? Like, there are some things that are within your control that you could do to make the problem a little worse in your corner of power, which is what
Mm.
the school board has, as opposed to just looking at externally and saying, oh, why don't you all solve this? Or like, we condemn this, or we just wish this wouldn't be happening anymore. And so, yeah, I think last night our public comment, when we had lots of people call in about teacher equity, was an ask for them to take the power that they do have to eliminate institutional racism within our city, right? To stop some of the patterns, don't be contributing to the patterns of racist movement, around, like the racist trends of movement and patterns around teachers, right? Like, and so, that's one example. There's other examples around ways that we can hold teachers and staff accountable for racist actions and words made. But anyways, so yeah, I totally agree with you. But also, not while something I was frustrated about, I actually have a separate do better moment. So my do better moment was, while we had lots of folks call in around teacher equity, there was also a protest around literacy because folks were fed up last night, or have been fed up with kind of the district's approach to literacy and how we're talking about literacy. And we were told we were going to get a literacy plan earlier in the spring, and we actually only got a literacy framework, and the plan is coming and all this stuff. And so last night, folks were outside of the Davis Center protesting, and there wasn't really any conversation about literacy. I will say that, when the superintendent was making comments about the budget, or maybe it was one of the school board members, they were saying how they're happy to see that literacy was addressed in the budget. But it feels hard to match how are you going to have some things in your budget around literacy when you don't actually have a plan, and we don't know what tools, and we don't know what, all that stuff, and we're already buying things that are showing up in the consent agenda, but we don't have a plan in place. And so I don't know why the school board's approving stuff that isn't laid out in a plan. And so anyway, I think that's really frustrating, and that will be my do better moment. So yeah, I don't know. Heather, let's move on to most valuable moments. Let's end on a positive note for this fiscal year. What is your most valuable moment?
So my most valuable moment goes to Director Caprini. She made a comment toward the end of the meeting, just really saying how much public comment resonated with her, and what she said was like, while we're talking about teacher of color shortage and inequitable access to high quality teachers and a lot of the things that we see, what she said was like, this is a national problem, but why can't our city lead the change? Why do we just have to sit back and say, oh, this is a national problem? And she's like, I want our city to be the example. And so I appreciated her being the only board member to comment on this issue, and I appreciated her sort of being willing to say, like, we can use tools that we have. So that's my most valuable moment. What's yours?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I thought that was actually the most valuable moment of last night's board meeting. But just to highlight something different, I actually want to give my most valuable moment to Superintendent Graff, and I seriously mean that. I know we've been tough on him the last several months, and rightfully so. But I did think it was important that last night Superintendent Graff reflected some of the comments that were shared during the community engagement stakeholder conversations around the America Rescue Plan dollars, the ESSER $3. Full disclosure, I am part of the stakeholder committee. And so he shared a lot of feedback that we had shared with him. And I was just happy to hear that it was clearly reflected. I was also happy to hear that MDE pushed out the deadline for Minneapolis Public Schools to continue to do community engagement and create a plan until October 1st. So, there was a big rush to try to get community engagement in before the end of this month, essentially. Now there's time. And so, two things I hope happen. One, I hope MPS does broader engagement and really tries to hear from folks around what are some of the ways that we should be spending these dollars. But also, I hope that folks listen to this and take the opportunity to really make sure MPS knows what they want to have the dollars be spent on. And so that was my most valuable moment. And I appreciate Superintendent Graff hearing us and, allowing that to shape kind of what they were going to be moving forward with. And I also hope that there continues to be broader engagement. And I hope that, this pattern continues of him listening, the cabinet listening, and then being able to work with their plan, change their plan, and make a plan that really serves this community in the ways that it wants to be served. So,
yeah, it was a big difference from what he said a month ago at the board meeting around ESSER dollars, and I appreciated that as well.
Yeah. So that's our quick recap. Take a listen to our longer video where we'll discuss, some stuff about school closures, some more stuff around our public comment, and just different things like that. But thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Bye.